Welcome to Context. I'm Brad Harris. If you'd like to hear over a dozen additional bonus episodes of Context and listen to the entire show ad-free, please consider signing up to support me at patreon.com/Brad Cole Harris or subscribe through Apple Podcasts or Spotify. In my last episode, I explored the idea that the 21st century may be best understood not as a line of unprecedented progress or decline brought about primarily by artificial intelligence, but as an evolutionary bottleneck, a narrowing of which ways of human life can actually sustain themselves as the digital world becomes more immersive and as AI becomes more powerful. This concept of an evolutionary bottleneck characterizing what may happen to humanity post-AI was made prominent by the author Ross Douthat in a New York Times article he published back in April of 2025 titled, "An Age of Extinction is Coming. Here's How to Survive." And his central claim, I think, was largely correct. If our culture loses the will or the capacity to form families, raise children, and transmit itself across generations, it doesn't need to be conquered. It will simply fade out. That brings us to an even deeper question. Not a demographic question, but a philosophical one. Because the important issue is not only which lifestyles survive, it's what kind of inner structure those lifestyles require. What kind of person? What kind of psychology? What kind of human spirit? Family life is the most obvious example of this kind of human spirit, because it's the most ancient one. Family life is a long project. It demands patience, sacrifice, responsibility, and a willingness to bind yourself to others across time. And if you have children, you eventually find yourself living in two directions at once, investing downward into the next generation, and then, as you age, turning around and investing upward as your aging parents need you more and more too. It's hard, it's costly, and it is also, for most people, among the deepest sources of fulfillment they will ever know. But family life is not the only place where human beings have historically found meaning. There are other, equally ancient impulses that run alongside it, which emerge when survival alone is not the only priority. Those impulses include the drive to maintain our human dignity, to discover the world we inhabit, and to understand reality. At first glance, these may seem like very different paths. Family life is rooted in hereditary continuity and care. The others are often rooted in risk-taking and uncertainty. But psychologically, they are built on the same foundation. All ask human beings to commit themselves to something whose rewards are indirect, uncertain, and often shared with people they will never meet, from great-great-grandchildren to future scientists and frontier settlers. All demand discipline, courage, and a willingness to endure hardship for the sake of something greater than oneself. For most of human history, meaning was not a lifestyle accessory. Life demanded it. Basic reality imposed a kind of seriousness. Shelter had to be maintained, children had to be protected, civilization had to be defended. Knowledge had to be earned the hard way, often through punishing physical effort. And failure carried immediate, sometimes fatal consequences. Every ordinary day demanded effort, endurance, and responsibility simply to keep humanity going in the right direction. And therefore, every ordinary day imposed training in living a meaningful life. And this is one of the strangest things about the modern era. We now live in a world where meaning has become effectively optional. It is possible for an increasing number of people to drift for years inside mere consumerism, pleasure, and distraction without ever being forced to bind themselves to anything difficult or durable. So, in this episode, I want to ask a simple question. If we are entering a bottleneck that rewards long-term commitments to things beyond one's own short-term satisfaction, what did some of the most significant such commitments look like historically? What kind of mettle have men and women possessed over the centuries to help the rest of us evolve from cave dwellers to city builders? To answer that, I want to step back to an older world, a world where meaning arose primarily from struggle, from the pursuit of greatness, from the courage to confront what was unknown, what was dangerous, and what was real, and to emerge on the other side with precious new perspective. To do that, I want to anchor this episode in 3 books: David Grann's The Wager, Stephen Ambrose's Undaunted Courage, and Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything. The first book is a story of endurance. The second is a story of exploration. And the third is a story of understanding. Different centuries, different stakes, different settings, but all unified by the same human impulse: the will to keep pressing forward through life's most dire challenges in pursuit of something more meaningful than one's own survival. And this will, the will to survive not only for survival's sake, but for the sake of accomplishing something historically profound, has been one of the most potent factors powering the rise of civilization. Let's start with the sea. The ocean has always been a vast reservoir of possibility, of food, trade, and power. It's promised transformation to those willing to risk everything to explore it, cross it, and conquer it. The ocean is also vast and lethal and indifferent. In his book, The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder, David Grann reconstructs one of the most harrowing naval expeditions of the 18th century. This is a true story. The Wager was a British warship sent to sea in 1740 as part of a broader imperial campaign against Spain during what was known as the War of Jenkins' Ear. Britain's objective was straightforward in theory and brutal in practice: send squadrons around the southern tip of South America, enter the Pacific, and intercept Spanish treasure ships returning from the Americas. Success promised immense financial reward for officers and crew alike, as well as prestige for the nation. Failure meant years at sea, exposure to disease and storms, and a very real chance of never returning home. The war with Spain may have been the reason the Wager sailed, but it was the alien coastline, the unfamiliar peoples, the violent weather, and the absence of rescue that defined the experience. And in that sense, the ship did not just encounter an enemy, it encountered a world that demanded a profound sense of purpose from everyone who would survive. The men aboard the Wager understood this bargain when they signed on. Most were not philosophers or adventurers in the modern romantic sense. They were sailors, tradesmen, and officers shaped by a world in which danger was ordinary. They expected hardship. What they could not anticipate was the scale and duration of the suffering that lay ahead. After months at sea, weakened by storms, scurvy, and exhaustion, the Wager was driven onto the desolate coast of Patagonia, a vast, windswept region at the southern edge of South America, where cold seas, violent gales, rocky shores, and the near-total absence of shelter or reliable food made survival brutally difficult, even for the well-prepared. Thousands of miles from any European settlement, with no clear route home and no certainty that anyone even knew where they were, the survivors found themselves stranded beyond the edge of the map. What followed was not a single catastrophe, but a prolonged ordeal that stretched on for years. Supplies dwindled, hunger became constant. Naval discipline, designed for order at sea, proved fragile on land. Authority fractured, alliances shifted, moral lines blurred under the pressure of starvation and fear. Author David Grann's account becomes, in effect, an anatomy of collapse, not just of a ship, but of the social structures that normally hold human beings together. And yet, the story does not end simply in chaos or despair. Some of the men did survive. Some eventually made their way back to civilization by routes that were long, uncertain, and unimaginably punishing. The full resolution is fascinating and deeply human, and it's why the book is such a good read. But here's the key. Even after the original mission had failed, after the ship disintegrated on the rocks, after the prize money had receded into abstraction, and even after many of the men devolved into animals scratching survival out of the dirt, several others somehow maintained their civility. They remained honest about rationing food. They continued to take care of the wounded and sick. They insisted on treating the indigenous fishermen they encountered with respect. In other words, they maintained some thread, however thin, of dignity and of civilization. For the men of the 18th century, this form of character endurance was expected because it was bound up with their sense of identity. Effort to remain civil, even if you were on the edge of death, mattered because it was inseparable from your duty as a man. These men did not think of themselves primarily as isolated survivors. They understood themselves as heirs to a civilizational tradition that prized discipline, competence, and self-command. To abandon that discipline was not merely to fail personally, it was to betray a sacred trust. That sense of duty did not require religious devotion, though for many their endurance was reinforced by faith. Nor was it sustained by optimism. It rested on something sturdier, the belief that a man was accountable not just for outcomes, but for conduct under pressure. You kept going because that was what a responsible person did, because others depended on you, because giving up was not morally neutral. Discipline, then, was a source of profound meaning, not because it guaranteed success, but because it expressed character. To endure with dignity was to affirm that you were, in fact, a man and not an animal, and as such, you were still answerable to something larger than your own suffering. That orientation defined human purpose across countless societies for centuries. It shaped how people understood their membership in those societies. Which brings us to the wonderful book, Undaunted Courage, historian Stephen Ambrose's account of the Lewis and Clark expedition. In 1804, Thomas Jefferson turned to Meriwether Lewis, a Virginia born Army officer he trusted deeply, and asked him to undertake an unprecedented mission. Lewis was physically tough, accustomed to hardship, and experienced in wilderness survival, but just as importantly, he was disciplined, observant, and insatiably curious. Jefferson charged him with assembling a small, carefully selected unit, what would become the Corps of Discovery, and with doing something no American had ever done: to travel across the newly acquired Louisiana Territory, follow the Missouri River as far as it would go, cross whatever mountains lay beyond, reach the Pacific Ocean, and return with knowledge. Not treasure, not conquest, knowledge. Jefferson wanted maps where none existed, measurements of rivers, notes on climate and terrain, accounts of plants, animals, and minerals unknown to science. He wanted diplomatic contact with indigenous nations to learn who lived there, how they governed themselves, and how trade might work. The expedition was scientific, political, and exploratory all at once. It was an attempt to make the continent legible. The party was small by design, roughly 40 men at the outset, including soldiers, boatmen, interpreters, and craftsmen. They carried rifles, trade goods, medical supplies, navigational instruments, notebooks, and enough provisions to get them started, but not nearly enough to guarantee success. Much of what they would need, they would have to find, hunt, barter, or improvise along the way. They trained, they planned, they studied the best maps available, which beyond the Mississippi were speculative at best. Lewis imagined, as did many at the time, that the Rockies might be crossed by a manageable portage, followed by a great western river flowing gently to the Pacific, a kind of natural symmetry to the continent. That hope did not survive contact with reality. What they encountered instead was scale. Rivers that raged for hundreds of miles, mountains that did not end, but multiplied, range after range, higher and harsher than anything they had imagined. Long stretches where food was scarce and exhaustion constant. Every day required keen practical judgment: which river to follow, when to press on and when to stop, how to maintain discipline without breaking morale, how to keep men moving when the destination felt impossibly far away. And yet they did keep moving. What sustained them was not the promise of riches. It was not even the certainty that they would succeed. It was a primordial drive to know what else was out there. There was loyalty, certainly, to Jefferson, to one another, to the young republic they represented, but there was something more elemental at work. A belief that the world was meant to be explored, understood, measured, and named. This is what author Stephen Ambrose captures so well. Not just the hardship, but the scientific attitude, catalyzed by sheer curiosity of the unknown and sheer wonder toward new possibilities. And in that sense, Undaunted Courage belongs in the same lineage as The Wager. Both sets of men invested themselves entirely into a sense of purpose greater than their own survival. Stephen Ambrose captures this posture clearly when he writes that Lewis possessed, quote, an extraordinary capacity for sustained effort, a willingness to press on when others would stop, and a sense that the work itself mattered, regardless of outcome. End quote. That sentence contains the core of the ethic that defines great exploration. Effort is not justified by success, but by fidelity to the task. Lewis and Clark kept going not because they knew they would reach the Pacific, but because they believed that someone had to. That the work of mapping, measuring, observing, and learning could not be postponed until conditions were more comfortable or guarantees available. Of course, they did make it, and it took them just under 2.5 years. The Corps of Discovery pushed off from Camp Wood, just north of St. Louis, on May 14, 1804, reached the Pacific in November of 1805, wintered at Fort Clatsop near today's Astoria, Oregon, and then made their way back to St. Louis, arriving on September 23, 1806. More than 8,000 miles of river, portage, mountains, snow, and improvised logistics, with only one death along the way. Sergeant Charles Floyd, early in the journey, most likely from a ruptured appendix. They spent an entire winter trapped in the northern plains, surviving on dwindling supplies while temperatures plunged far below anything most of the men had ever experienced. Later, they reached the point where the continent was supposed to gently tip westward, only to discover instead an endless wall of mountains. Crossing those ranges meant weeks of near starvation, eating candles and whatever roots they could dig from frozen ground, pushing through snow so deep that men collapsed from exhaustion. When they finally reached western rivers, the danger didn't ease. Swollen currents, hidden rocks, violent rapids repeatedly capsized their canoes, nearly drowning men and destroying precious records and instruments. And after reaching the Pacific Ocean at last, after more than a year of uncertainty, they had to turn around and do the entire thing again, upstream, across the same mountains, with no guarantee they would survive a second crossing. What they brought back mattered enormously to the history of America. The expedition returned with the first reliable maps of the American interior, detailed knowledge of the Missouri River system, concrete proof that the continent could, in fact, be crossed. They cataloged hundreds of plant and animal species previously unknown to Western science, established diplomatic relationships with dozens of indigenous nations, and transformed a vague imperial claim into practical geographical knowledge. In historical terms, the success of the Lewis and Clark expedition laid the groundwork for trade routes, settlement, and the eventual emergence of the United States as a global power. Seen this way, Undaunted Courage completes the picture that the wager begins. One shows us what it means to endure without losing one's humanity. The other shows us what it means to move forward purely on faith. And together, they remind us of something modern life increasingly obscures: that meaning rarely emerges from success alone, but from effort, from refusing to surrender one's standards even when circumstances are brutal, and from refusing to retreat even when facing an abyss of uncertainty. And that brings us to our third and final book of this episode, Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything. Bryson's book is not about maintaining dignity in the face of death or exploration across unknown terrain. It is about a sense of purpose even more audacious: humanity's will to understand the universe itself. Not merely what is out there, but how it works, why it behaves as it does, why matter holds together, why stars burn, why continents move, why life exists at all. Bill Bryson's achievement in this book is to compress centuries of scientific effort into a single coherent narrative, while never losing sight of the human beings who paid the cost of that understanding. Again and again, he returns to the same theme that the modern world rests on an extraordinary accumulation of patient, obsessive, and often self sacrificial inquiry by people who are willing to devote their lives to questions whose answers might never benefit them personally. Take something as basic as the age of the Earth. For most of human history, no one knew. Estimates ranged wildly, often constrained by theology or guesswork. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that scientists even began to approach a reliable answer, and doing so required decades of painstaking work in obscure laboratories, measuring infinitesimal traces of radioactive decay. Bryson tells the story of scientists who spent entire careers isolating elements, refining instruments, correcting errors, and starting over again and again, simply to determine how long the planet had existed before any human being ever set foot on it. There was no applause for this work, no obvious payoff, just the conviction that it mattered to know. Or consider our understanding of the atom, something so fundamental that it underlies all of modern chemistry, physics, medicine, and technology. Bryson recounts how generations of scientists pursued the structure of matter through experiments so delicate and abstract that even describing them strains language. Some worked in isolation. Some destroyed their health, handling radioactive materials before their dangers were fully understood. Others labored for decades only to be proven wrong by later discoveries. And yet those wrong turns still mattered because they narrowed the field and sharpened the questions. In one of the book's most striking through lines, Bryson reminds us how often scientific progress depended not on genius alone, but on stubborn endurance. People willing to take measurements again and again, to catalog specimens, to classify, to count, to revise. Consider the early geologists who mapped strata by hand, hiking mile after mile across unforgiving terrain to understand how rock layers recorded deep time. Or the naturalists who cataloged life's diversity, traveling the world to identify, describe, and preserve species, often dying of disease or exhaustion in the process, driven by the belief that the living world deserved to be known. Even something as seemingly mundane as measuring the distance between stars required extraordinary commitment. Bryson tells the story of astronomers who spent decades observing tiny shifts in starlight, working night after night in freezing observatories, waiting patiently for the Earth's orbit to provide the slightest change in perspective. Many of these men never lived to see their work fully validated. They accepted that. The task mattered anyway. Bryson is careful to remind us that the history of most scientific discovery was not driven by fame-seeking or reward. In fact, some of the most important breakthroughs were made by people who actively avoided recognition altogether, men and women whose commitment to understanding bordered on obsession, and whose lives were organized almost entirely around the pursuit of truth alone. One of the most striking examples in the book is Henry Cavendish, an 18th century English scientist so reclusive that he rarely spoke to other human beings at all. Cavendish devoted his life to measuring the fundamental properties of the universe with extraordinary precision. He weighed the Earth, he isolated hydrogen, he calculated constants that still underpin modern physics, and he did it almost entirely alone, working patiently, methodically, and without any apparent desire for recognition. As Bryson writes, quote, Cavendish was so reclusive that he seemed to regard human contact as a form of contamination, yet he was the most exact and accomplished experimental scientist of his age." End quote. What makes this remarkable is not Cavendish's eccentricity, but his orientation. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was not trying to build a career. He simply wanted to know how the world worked, and he was willing to give his entire life to that effort. This clarifies the ultimate level of purpose that's driven our species from the Stone Age to the stars. Those among us with scientific minds have invested themselves through centuries of sustained effort into understanding the world, driven by a conviction that reality is intelligible, that truth is worth pursuing, and that human beings are obligated, by virtue of our exceptional intellectual tools, to at least try to comprehend the universe. Meaning here takes a higher form. To devote one's life not only to surviving or exploring, but to understanding, is to place one's faith in the intrinsic value of knowledge. The scientists Bill Bryson describes were sustained by a belief that explaining how the world works is part of what it means to be fully human. Once you see the human story this way, something important about artificial intelligence comes into focus. If the deepest thread running through human history is the effort to understand, then AI could be seen simply as the most recent expression of that ancient impulse. Up until this historical moment, human beings could only take understanding so far. Our senses are limited, our memories are fickle, our intuitions, powerful as they are, break down when faced with systems that span billions of years or trillions of variables. Even our mathematics, elegant as it is, eventually runs into walls of scale and complexity that no human mind can hold. Artificial intelligence changes that, perhaps not by replacing human purpose, but by amplifying it. We may now be in a position to create tools that exceed our own cognitive limits in ways that allow us to understand more than we ever could before. To see patterns we could never detect, to test hypotheses we could never fully imagine, to model realities too vast, too small, or too complex for the human mind to grasp unaided. We've already been doing this for centuries with more basic technologies and computers. AI just massively amplifies our intellectual leverage. In this light, AI is not merely a labor-saving device or a productivity engine. It is a new kind of intellectual instrument, like the telescope, the microscope, or calculus, only vastly more powerful. And like those earlier tools, its ultimate moral significance will depend not on what it can do, but on what we choose to use it for. At the most basic level, human purpose begins with survival, keeping ourselves and our children alive. Beyond that, it expands into dignity, the insistence that survival should mean something more than mere existence. Beyond that comes exploration, the drive to find out where we are, what surrounds us, and what possibilities the world holds. And finally, human purpose culminates in knowledge, the attempt to understand how and why reality itself is structured the way it is, where the universe came from in the first place, and where all of this is going. Intelligence is the master variable that runs through all of these layers of meaning. The more intelligent we are, biologically, culturally, and now technologically, the more capable we become of fulfilling each level of that purpose, of caring well for one another, of maintaining civilization under pressure, of exploring wisely rather than blindly, and of orienting ourselves to the universe not as a place of mystery alone, but as a coherent reality that invites explanation. This is why the rise of artificial intelligence does not have to be read only as a threat. It could also be read as an amazing opportunity, of course. A chance to blow past the limits of our own native cognition, a chance to understand more deeply what kind of world we inhabit and what kind of beings we are within it. Whether AI becomes a force for erosion or for elevation will depend on whether we remember what intelligence is for. If we treat AI as a partner in the long human project of asking better questions, seeing more clearly, and orienting ourselves ever more squarely toward truth, then it may yet help us grasp the full purpose of human life: to reach for understanding beyond ourselves without forgetting who we are. I'm Brad Harris. So long.